Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 12th episode of the Survival Project. Today, I'm joined by broadcaster and psoriasis advocate Zoe Ryan. Zoe shares her in-depth knowledge of all things psoriasis. You're in for a fantastically educational episode. But before I dive in today, I have some very exciting news. I am very happy to announce that today's episode is supported by Salt's Healthcare. Salt's Healthcare create innovative stomach care products, and they have kindly come on board to support what I'm trying to build. These episodes take a lot of my time, and in the future, I would really like for them to take a lot more of my time. I really do have big plans for what I'd like to achieve with this podcast. With the right support, I can make those goals a reality. So I do want to say a massive thank you to Salt's Healthcare for seeing the potential. Salt's have an amazing app called RC Connect, and I can't wait to tell you all about it later in the episode. So for now, let's get into episode 12. So Zoe, thank you so much for joining me today. Could you just maybe dive into a little bit your own experience with psoriasis?
Yes, and thank you so much for having me on, Jonathan. I think this is a fantastic podcast idea. When you initially contacted me with it, and it's, the survival, I was going, how is this going to be relevant to me? But then when I thought about it, it's like, no, I think this actually is a good fit for me. Something that I speak to with a lot of other psoriasis advocates like myself when we meet up at conferences is sometimes it's really hard to go back into that dark headspace that you were in when you were first diagnosed, and I suppose in the years that follow, when you've come out of it. And a lot of it would be of the same kind of persuasion and thinking of myself that we've gone past that stage. It's not that we don't still recognize it and respect that others are in it. It's that we've gone past it. So sometimes we need to just remind ourselves of what it's like when you're back in that time so that we can help people who are still in it to kind of pull them too, as I say, out of the darkness and into the bright side of it. So thank you for asking me on this podcast, and hopefully it'll allow me to reach back into my mind of when I was in that stage and how I came out of it and into this phase.
It's like, I suppose, in the sense of survival, when we receive initial diagnosis of something that is a complete new thing that we know nothing about, it can be such a scary thing, and we go into, I suppose, fight or flight mode, and we can obviously go into survival mode to try and learn and figure out what's going on. So I know for myself from reading an interview with you, you mentioned before that when you heard the word incurable, you actually described it as, you described everything going quiet and feeling that it has to be a mistake. The word incurable is a very tough one to hear. I myself have heard it before, and it puts you down a dark hole of a thought process until you figure out what's actually going on. But how did that moment shape your understanding of what life with psoriasis would be?
Yeah, well, that experience, my initial diagnosis, it left me feeling like life with psoriasis was going to be very bleak, to be quite honest with you. And it was, if you can imagine, I went into that appointment full of hope and positivity. I know a lot of people, when it comes to medical appointments, they can go in thinking the worst. I was the opposite. I went in there thinking that this was something that could be easily rectified, because before that day, I'd never even heard of psoriasis. Definitely wouldn't have associated the word incurable with it. So I went in there with hope that this was something that, as I say, could be easily rectified. And I was really shocked and in disbelief when I heard otherwise. I felt like the clinician who delivered the diagnosis to me, that they didn't quite understand the weight of the words that they were delivering to a teenager who was sitting in front of them, telling a teenager that they had this incurable condition that was going to affect their appearance, because obviously that's a time in your life when, teenagers classically are very obsessed with their appearance. So for me, it was a blow that I just wasn't expecting. And as I said, I went in there full of hope. And it's not that I left without the hope. I did leave with hope, but I left with a different hope, a hope that they were wrong, that this wasn't the case, that I didn't have this condition, and that there was something else to come with it. So as I said, from that initial diagnosis and what was revealed to me then about the condition and what would be required to manage it, I left feeling like this seems like a very bleak life to live. But yet I was hopeful I wouldn't have to live it.
Sounds like, I suppose, what helped you shift from that place of nearly almost despair to acceptance now?
Definitely it was. I started following people in the psoriasis community online who had a different outlook on life than that. As I said, when I was diagnosed and in the years following it, I had a very negative opinion of psoriasis and life with it. I felt very much like in those years following the diagnosis, I tried every and any treatment and products that I could get my hands on, and I just never saw the results that I wanted to. And for that reason, I felt like I was stuck in this vicious circle of that for the rest of my life, I was going to be trying these products on and off. I would see some relief for short periods of time with it, but ultimately was always going to have to keep up this management. And it can be quite difficult keeping up with the management and undergoing the treatments, especially when you're not seeing the results you want. It can be very disheartening, devastating. It can be hard to pick yourself up and keep going with it. So that was the headset that I was in with it. Then I embarked on a journey where I filmed a documentary on psoriasis. I'm a radio and television broadcaster by trade, and as I say, a psoriasis advocate by vocation. And I suppose that call for me came following that documentary series. I owe an awful lot to searching for a cure. It put me on the path that I'm on today, that ultimately led me to this state. But it was from filming that documentary series, I learned an awful lot about the condition, which helped me to better understand it, to start to accept it, and come around to this idea that maybe life isn't as damned as I thought it would be. And I started at that stage seeking out the psoriasis community online to see other people who were living with it, because it's not something that I had looked into before then. I thought I was all on my own in this. I didn't realize there was other people out there who were experiencing it or what their experience of it was. So I started seeking them out online, and it was from seeing how positive that they were about living with this condition, how they were smiling in their photographs, bearing the markings on their skin for all to see. And I myself started to come around to that then. It was almost infectious, if you can imagine, consuming that media day in, day out, looking at these people with this positive outlook. It started to catch on. And I started coming around to that idea then that you could actually be happy living with this condition. So it was that helped to pull me out of that space. It was finding the psoriasis community online, the ones that were of that positive outlook of living with it, that helped me to come around to that idea and to not see it as daunting or as damning to have this condition.
That is an amazing testament to the power of community that is out there in so many different spaces when it comes to like any chronic illness or anything you might be suffering with. And it's great that you advocated for yourself so strongly, like to go to the depths of going and making a documentary, to learn everything you possibly could learn about this new issue that you were dealing with. How much did the research and everything you learned from that documentary shape how you decided to tackle psoriasis going forward?
Yeah, the documentary is a little bit tongue in cheek. As I said, I owe a lot to, I called it Searching for a Cure. That was the name of the documentary. And I thought it's very telling in itself. Back then, I was in a very different headspace than I am now with the condition. All I wanted to do was to get rid of it. I didn't really even want to understand the condition. I just wanted it gone. And I became obsessed with trying different products and treatments that would help me to do that. So I was so obsessed that I managed to even convince a board to allow me to go traipsing across the country with the film crew with me, trying out these alternative treatments, alternatives to traditional Western medicine. And it was a fantastic experience. Like, we interviewed everyone from the likes of faith healers to seaweed foragers to traditional Chinese herbal medicine facilitators. And it was from that experience that, as I said, I learned a lot about the condition. I went into it hoping to come out of it finding a cure. Instead, I came out of it with an understanding as to why there wasn't a cure, which was something that I hadn't been persuaded around to. Up until that stage, I was very much in denial, which I think anybody who is diagnosed with a condition that they're told it's chronic, it's incurable, you'll always live in hope that there is actually a cure out there and that someone just hasn't discovered it, or that the cure is on its way. For me, I was like, nah, that can't be right. There's definitely a cure out there. It's just a case of they haven't found it. So I'm going to go and find it. So I was focused, hellbent on this obsession with a cure, and I chased that elusive cure, which a lot of people do, understandably enough, because you just want the life back that you had before being diagnosed. And that's one of the hardest things, I think. It's to let go of the life that you had before, the life that you foresee for yourself, that you know now with any condition that's chronic. It alters your life in some way, to some extent or another. So it's hard to come around to the idea that the life that you had and the life that you thought you were going to have isn't attainable anymore, or at least it's going to look very different. So I grasped onto that and refused to believe that I had to come around to living in this way, and just wanted to go back to the way it was. So embarked on this journey across the country with the film crew, speaking to different practitioners. And it's from that, as I said, I learned about the condition and I came around to a different way of thinking on it. And it was only afterwards, upon reflection of watching through the footage, that I said to myself, I would love to share this information with others to help them to pull themselves out of where I was at the time, and to see the condition in a different way, and to see life with it in a different way, a more positive way that made it more palatable to live with it. And I thought, how am I going to do that? And even though the footage from that documentary, it's cinematic. I mean, it was shot in some beautiful areas across the country, that we went down to areas in Kerry, this lovely coastal visions, and it was shot on proper professional cameras by actual qualified cameramen. So that documentary and the footage, it's never been released to this date. And it's something that I'd like to see released. But the reason why it hasn't been is because I would not be happy for it to be aired in its current state. Because as I said, I had a different focus back then. The language I would have used towards the condition, it's not the way I feel about it anymore. And the aim of treatment for me has completely changed. So I'd love to revisit it so that people could actually see the footage. Maybe sometimes I go through thinking, how would I actually use it? And I think of the format of the Last Dance documentary that was done with Michael Jordan, where maybe, it's me sitting down like I am now and someone asking me in hindsight to go back and reflect about it, show the nice footage and think what was going through your mind at that time. How has it changed? How would you do it differently if you were to film it today type of situation? So as I said, the documentary actually has never been aired. And at the time I wanted it to be aired, I didn't see as much problems with it as I do now, where I'm going, that's not exactly in line with how I think anymore. So I was going, I can't actually publish the documentary because then a broadcaster wouldn't be interested in taking it on. The footage would be out there and they'd no longer want it. So I said, I want to share what I've learned, but I can't use the footage. How am I going to do that? So that's where the idea to set up Itchin To Tell You came out of. I said, I'll use that platform. I decided it had to be social media because I wanted it to be easily accessible and to be available to a wide audience. So I said, make it that it's free access, that everybody can access it. So that's where the idea for Itching To Tell You came from. So I suppose the documentary, as I say, I owe it a lot. It's put me on the path that I'm on. It's led to me creating Itching To Tell You, which has led to me embarking on a lot of advocacy activities over the year. And I'd like for Itching To Tell You to go to the next level. Now, I think that it started off as me just wanting to be a space where people would be able to see that they're not alone, that they could learn more about their condition, that I could share helpful tips and tricks that I've kind of developed over the years. But I wanted now to become an official resource that people can go to find quality information about their condition, to find other resources. And so I'm looking to move it on to the next step now. This year, I'd like to establish a website, make it all very official. So that's all in the works, but it all definitely stemmed from that documentary.
Big plans ahead, and even listening to you speak, I'm excited for what your future might possibly hold, because the fact that you can reflect on that documentary, know what you learned from it, and still say, I know I can use it in the future to document exactly my journey with what I've experienced now, and to be able to reflect back and take all the knowledge you've learned now in the present state and go back and really see how the language changes and how your understanding of the condition has really changed. Definitely something I'd be interested in, and I'm sure everyone listening to this will be too. Now, there's just two things I want to kind of circle back on. You mentioned that during the documentary, you wanted to learn, to share, to help other people. And I think it's an amazing thing what you've done with your platform, Itchin To Tell You, because obviously you have turned what is a pain, you've turned it into purpose, and you've really brought light and positivity into something that's such a hard thing to go through, because it can have such an effect on us mentally. It's obviously having an effect physically. You've previously mentioned talking about hiding your condition with clothing, makeup, your hair, and worrying how people might react. At what point did you decide to actually show your plaques openly, and what kind of pushed you to be so open about that?
Yeah, as you said, I was the master of deception, as many people living with kind of visual conditions are, especially when it's a visual condition that you don't want people to see and that you have the opportunity to maybe hide it. It would have been a case of, for many years, I was hiding the visual signs of the condition, as you said, through clever clothing options, through maybe hairstyles, through positioning of different, what would you say, accessories maybe. And I remember a day came where I was no longer able to hide the visual signs. They had become so kind of extent that the ways of masking them that I'd previously engaged in, they weren't really cutting it anymore. And I was very acutely aware and conscious of that I wasn't able to cover it up and that people could see it. So that was a stage that I went through where there was this panic and anxiety about it. But how I kind of came out of that was, it was a couple of months after following people from the psoriasis community, as I said, who were of that positive outlook where they were proudly bearing their marks for everyone to see. And they just looked so free. And back then I felt trapped a lot of the time. I felt like I couldn't show people who I actually was out of this fear. I was afraid of how people would react if they saw the scales, because to most people, the scales look unsightly. They're now something that I don't view as unsightly anymore. But back then, I was of the opinion of the general population is that these lesions and sores on the skin, people, I think when they see rashes, they are afraid that they're contagious. And that was something I was acutely aware of. And my biggest fear was that people would see them and that they would react negatively, that they would maybe stand back from me out of fear or they would recoil. So that was this fear in the back of my mind. And that's always why I covered up, because I was acutely aware that society tells us we have to have this clear skin, that we're not acceptable if we deviate from that. And my skin didn't look like that. So for me, it was from consuming that media every day. I came around to the idea going, I want to do that too. I want to feel like the way they look like they feel. I want to speak positively the way that these people are. And I felt ready. And it's something that not a lot of people listening to this even would thinking, oh God, I'd never be able to do that. And that's completely fine. It comes with time that you start going, maybe I could do that. And I got to a stage where I felt like I was ready to show that part of me, this side of me that very little people had known about. And I was willing to take whatever was going to come. You know, the way you hear horror stories of trolls on the internet, you who has a platform like this where you bear a side of yourself that a lot of people would probably be critical of. We know going into that what we're signing up for. We're going, well, look, we're going to have to take whatever comes out of it. So I was ready and I felt strong enough to say, I'm ready for the hate. I'm ready for people to come at me because I feel strong enough and confident enough in this. Which when I look back now, I was like, I was barely ready. I don't know why I felt like I was ready, but I had decided I was. And Psoriasis Awareness Day was coming up. Now, that was a date that before then I never even knew existed. Because if you imagine back then, I wasn't the advocate that I am today. I wasn't very forthcoming about having psoriasis, didn't tell anyone I had it, didn't know anything about the condition. And I didn't want to either. I just didn't want to have it. So I wasn't very immersed in that world the way that I am now, that I'd be so aware that there is a day such as Psoriasis Awareness Day. But I saw it was coming up and I said, you know what? I'm going to do it. And this is before I had created Itchin To Tell You. I was only in the phase where I'd come out of revising the documentary. I'd started looking into communities that were online. I'd realised that there was a lack of an Irish presence. There's a lot of people in the UK, the US, Asia, who have platforms like mine where they talk about living with psoriasis in those countries. But I felt like there was a lack of an Irish presence. So I was in the meantime trying to think, how can I get that information out there? As I said, I went through different ideas. Is it a YouTube series? Is it a podcast? What is it? And I was thinking through that. And I saw Psoriasis Awareness Day was coming up. And I decided to actually put 2 photos up on my own personal page. And I posted them. And it was the reaction that I got. That's what gave me the reassurance and the courage to keep doing it. I didn't know what to expect from people. And there was people that I didn't really know that well. Maybe people that I'd known from town or that I'd gone to school with were reaching out to me to commend me for being so brave as to put up these pictures and saying to me that, you know, I think it's great. And they were just the support that I got. I wasn't expecting the support that I got from people. And that was really heartening. And that gave me the encouragement to continue doing it. And from getting a little taste of it, so that would have been October of that year. It wasn't until May the next year that I had everything in place for Itchin To Tell You to be launched into the world. But I was living off the glory of those 2 pictures of how the worst didn't happen. You know, the worst for me was always, as I said, that experience of people recoiling back. I remember I put up the picture and the picture gave me the kind of confidence to where I remember the very first day that I decided to walk outside with my psoriasis on show. I was going to meet a friend in a cafe and I was doing my makeup and I got to the part of my forehead where I had lesions. I said, no, I'm not going to cover them. I don't know why that day I felt, no, I'm not going to cover them, but I didn't. And I went down the town and I was full of anxiety the whole walk down, the whole time I was sitting in the cafe. And when I got back, I said the worst didn't happen. There was no nasty stares. There was no comments made. No one seemed to notice except for me. And that experience as well, coupled with the response that I got from the online putting up the pictures, that made me think this is okay. This isn't as daunting as I thought it was going to be. When you have a condition like psoriasis, you're acutely aware of the markings and you think that when you walk into the room, it's all anybody can see. Whereas I remember a doctor who had psoriasis saying to me years ago, and I've now come to believe she is true, she's right with it. She said to me, you think that everyone's going to notice it, but people are so caught up in their own lives that they don't really notice these things. And I'm not saying that it doesn't happen. I'm not saying that people don't get the stares and the questions. My own father has psoriasis, and I know he has told me that people have come up to him in supermarkets to inform him that the back of his head is bleeding and children pointing. So I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I'm just saying I was very lucky that it didn't happen to me on those occasions, and therefore it gave me the strength and the encouragement to continue and to keep doing it. But it is a decision. It's an everyday decision. You wake up in the morning, you look in the mirror, you're assessing the damage that maybe you've done the night beforehand of clawing at your own skin. You want to see how badly visual your psoriasis is today. And if you're going somewhere, As I said, it's an everyday decision of, do I cover up or do I not? And for me, it used to be a decision and I go one way or the other, especially because, as I said, I work in radio and television. I'm acutely aware that sometimes people will hire me for jobs and they're not hiring me as Zoe Ryan of Itchin To Tell You. When I'm going to gigs like today, I have no questions around, should my psoriasis be on show today? Of course it should. That's what you are. You're an advocate. I think it's important that when I'm going to events like this or occasions where I've been asked as me, that I show up for the side, that people can see the psoriasis, that I look like them, that for the people that I'm representing and speaking on behalf of, that they see themselves in me. So in those instances now, it's not a question. I go, well, of course I have to show the psoriasis. But there was a period of time when I'd be going to modelling gigs and I'd be showing up for different television things. And I go, it's not really right on the client, is it? They didn't ask for someone with psoriasis. So maybe I should cover up the marks. Maybe I should take all the flakes out of my hair. But now I must say I don't do that anymore. I think about it. The thought comes into my head, but I go, no, they didn't necessarily ask for someone with psoriasis, but I do have psoriasis and they've hired me. So let's show up. Let's see if anyone says anything. And yet again, luckily, no one has ever pointed out to me or said, well, actually, I can see this lesion or I can see that. Could you cover that up or could you hide it? Maybe a day will come. Hopefully not, because I hope that from people like me doing what we do, showing up and showing people that there are more people who look like you, because I'm acutely aware there's a lot of people walking around with psoriasis and the lesions and they're covered up. And I hope even if I'm standing at a bus stop or somewhere in public that someone looks at me, sees the marks and goes, oh my God, she doesn't have that covered up. How is she standing there so confidently? And maybe that plants the seed in their head to think, maybe I'll do that. Maybe someday I'll be okay and comfortable to do that. So that's why the decision I make most of the time is, no, I am going to show the markings. I understand that that's not something everyone wants to do and not everyone's in the place. And some days you just don't have the strength. Because as I said, especially if it's at the start, you're filled with anxiety if you make that decision to walk out with the psoriasis. Now I'm at the point where I actually forget that I have the markings on show until maybe something happens where I become aware that they're on show. I myself know that a couple of months back, I was on a train. I was wearing a black velvet suit. A lot of people with psoriasis will avoid wearing dark colours, especially black, because it makes it more visual when the flakes fall on it. But me being the advocate I am and that I'm very embracing of it and promote that other people don't cover up and that they bear the markings, I found myself sitting on a train and suddenly feeling like all eyes were on me. I could feel the two women in front of me, their eyes were staring into my soul. And I looked down and I could see that my psoriasis flakes had become quite visual on my jacket, something I hadn't realised. And I knew that that's what they were looking at. And I could see them leaning in and whispering to each other. And I went, oh, Jesus, I said, what am I going to do? And then I felt bad nearly that those thoughts were going through my head because I'm going, Zoe, you have to practice what you preach. You're meant to own this situation. You're meant to sit here and go, yeah, that is psoriasis and I am proud of it, you know, but I didn't. And I'll admit that I felt embarrassed and I didn't know what I was going to do. And I went, oh my God, I don't have my lint roller in my bag. How am I going to get this off? Because it's velvet, it's clinging to it. And I was looking for an opportunity to do this big sweep where I knocked them off when the women looked away, but I couldn't. So I just sat there and I endured it. And I knew they were talking about me and I felt very uncomfortable. So I'll admit that. I hope next time that I'm in that situation that I feel like I have a bit more ownership of the scenario. But as I said, it's an everyday decision that you make. Will I cover up today or will I not? Will I let people see the visual markings of it and the symptoms, you know, and what will come of that? That day I found myself in a situation I didn't think I would, where I felt very acutely aware and conscious of it for the first time in a long time, where I went, oh God, what am I going to do? So yeah, I think for me, that was an experience that I didn't expect to find myself in this long into the advocacy journey. So I do recognise that it's something that a lot of people still go through on a daily basis.
Leon, I suppose we only become ready through action in a sense and by actually making movements towards a certain goal. I know I would often say that sometimes we suffer much more in our own mind than we actually do when we step out of it and take action, that things aren't actually as bad as they might be and we build up an idea of what they might be in our head. Reality isn't exactly that. But I know before, my mother has always said to me, it's none of your business what other people think of you. And that's always something that has stuck with me because you shouldn't be worried about what other people are thinking of you. And you're such a strong advocate and everything that you do, like your action shows the purpose behind what you're trying to achieve and what you're trying to promote. If you were to speak to a girl who has probably found themselves in the position you were in previously, really kind of feeling a bit down, they're suffering with their mental health, maybe they're experiencing psoriasis, it could be in a very visual place where they're actually afraid to step outside and show off the issue. What advice would you give them?
I would say that you're not alone. That was the main thing that I thought when I was first diagnosed. And I know I've mentioned that my father has psoriasis. So people might be thinking, well, why did she feel alone? Her father has it. With psoriasis, the onset of it typically happens at 2 points in your life. There's 2 stages in life where it typically will first present. So with psoriasis, it's not a condition that you're generally born with. It's a case of we're born with a genetic predisposition, which means we have the right combination of genes for us to go on and experience psoriasis. But very few people are actually born with psoriasis. Not a lot of people come out of the womb covered in scales of psoriasis. It's a case of you're born with the right combination of genes, and then something has to happen to ignite it in the body. And that's when we start experiencing the symptoms. So, for a lot of people, that first onset of symptoms will happen in the teenage to kind of late 20s years, or it can happen then as a second wave in your 50s to 60s. So, that's the one that I think arguably will be a bit more of a shock. Neither are good life stages for it to happen in. As I said previously, your teenage years are very formative years. They're times when people are very insecure, as it is, typically speaking, like generally. So it's a tough time for something like that to then happen to a person as the teenage years. But day in, day out, I get messages from people, both women and men, who are in that later stage in life saying to me, I'm 40, 50, 60. I'm just after breaking out in this. I thought I had life sussed out, and here I am. So my father actually, his first onset of psoriasis was, I believe it was in and around his 50th birthday. So that was actually after I'd experienced mine. So when I first got this diagnosis, I felt very much alone. Did not know then that so many family members on both my mother and father's side of the family actually have psoriasis. These people come out of the woodwork. It's like because of the work I do now, and I am an advocate, people just feel like they can tell me their life stories. And fair enough that I'm absolutely here for it. But a lot of people will say to me, did you know that your cousin or your auntie or whoever has that? And you're like, no, I didn't know that. That would have been really good to know back then when I was struggling. But thanks for letting me know now. But yeah, so it can be one of those conditions because I only recently was speaking at a conference in Dundalk IT to a group of students who were working on developing a product or a service that would address an issue with people living with psoriasis to improve their lives. And it was only at that I said to them that you will hear today that psoriasis is a visual condition. But you need to remember that it is a very regularly hidden and not often spoken about condition as well. Because those of us living with it, generally speaking, we tend to hide the visuals of it, the visual symptoms. We don't tend to have them on display and show. We don't tend to talk about it, which is a very Irish thing of going, sure, it'll be grand. If we don't think about it, it'll go away. I love doing a bit of an ostrich in the sand. I did that for a long time too. So for that reason, it can feel like you're very alone. And it's really hard to know where to turn with that because something that I think is a massive issue in this country is the way that conditions like psoriasis and other chronic conditions, how the diagnosis is delivered to people. It's an area that needs massive reform because I don't think that our doctors are appropriately trained to handle those situations. And I'm speaking generally. I have encountered doctors that are fantastic at that and they have the right approach and they have the right language and they have that caring touch. But from speaking to people who live with psoriasis, from the work that I do, I know that that is the minority. That generally speaking, we're met with what I was, which was this cold, callous approach to it. People not recognizing the weight of the words that they're saying to you. And I think that that's an area that really needs to be reformed is that when you were diagnosed with the condition, firstly, I think that there needs to be some reform there in how the doctor who's delivering the information delivers it, because it's a massive thing. You know, one of the first things you'd said to me was, you know, about how that initial diagnosis, how that set the tone of how you felt about the condition and life with it. That's a massive thing. The way that the doctor delivers the diagnosis to you, the language they use, how they explain it, that's going to set for you how you feel about it going forward. So if that's not a positive thing and you're scared and you feel like you don't know anything about it, that's not a good track to set a person on, especially when it's a lifelong condition that someone's going to be living with. Whatever about if you're saying to someone, you have this thing, I'm going to give you this medicine, you take it for 3 weeks and it's gone. That's not what chronic conditions are. This is something someone has to live with for the rest of life. So that's something that's really important. And it's the education system we need to look at for that. But something that they can do in the interim is when someone's diagnosed, I believe they should be handed a physical copy of a resource, a leaflet or a booklet that's going to talk them through. This is what the condition is. These are the treatments that are available, so on and so forth. At least then they leave with something tangible in their hand. Because, as you said, when I heard the word incurable, I'm not going to lie to you, I didn't hear some of the things that was said there after that. It's like I got that humming in my ears, that deafness of, when sometimes your ear starts ringing and it's like a silent ring and then it goes to numbness. That's what it was like for me for a couple of minutes in that diagnosis. So I'm not sure what she said then. And that's what happens in a lot of appointments. Even now, when you're going for follow up appointments, you'll forget everything you went in there wanting to ask. That's why I also advise people to write your questions down. You'll forget what the doctor said. That's why it's always great to bring someone with you if you feel comfortable to do so, that can tell you after, no, that's not what the doctor said. The doctor actually said this, etc. So there's all these little things that we can do for that diagnosis to be improved upon. But I definitely think you should be handed a leaflet to kind of advise you. And I think even further than that, you should be given an appointment or at least steered in the right way with someone who can help you. We live in the real world here, right? There is a shortage of doctors. There's a shortage of specialists. Whether you get your diagnosis from a GP or a specialist, these people have such a high volume of people that they need to see. They actually do not have the time to sit with you, to build this nice friendly rapport where you feel like you can talk to them and you can feel things. It's well and fine. I've gone into dermatology appointments after my diagnosis and the years after, and the doctor will say to you, and how do you find it? How are you living with it? And you nearly have this defense of, yeah, I'm fine. I'm grand. Why would you think there's something wrong? Because I don't have a rapport with that woman. I've not built up a relationship with her where I feel I can reveal things to her and have an actual chat. And that's down to time. You don't have time in an appointment, whether it's the diagnosis or in the appointments thereafter, to build this relationship with that person, to reveal things to them and actually have an honest conversation. Say that you're struggling, whether it's mentally or otherwise, about how you're living and coping with this condition. So I do think that you should definitely be steered in the right direction, that it's a recognition by the clinician to say, I'm not the right person to help you with living with this condition and the management of it. I can maybe prescribe the products and put you on the treatment paths. But outside of that, I can't really help you with the coping of living with this condition. As I said earlier, when you're diagnosed with a chronic condition, it's going to alter your life in some way or another. Some people might find it's not too obtrusive. Others may feel it turns it upside down. And to cope with that, you need someone who's going to be able to guide you through that. So I think a recognition from the clinician that they're not the right person to do that because they don't have the time. So they should be advising and steering you in the direction of someone who does, someone like a helpline, a charity who has the facilities in place. Your Skin are an organisation in Ireland. They're a charity who do have something in place like that. They have a fantastic resource called the Ask a Nurse helpline, where like that, if you have questions, you can call up the nurse. You'll be put through to a dermatology nurse, so someone who deals with this day in, day out, and they will give you all the time they have and that you need to talk you through this, to steer you in the right direction. So as I said, they have the time to do that. So I think there needs to be a recognition on the clinician that they don't have the time. They're not the person best placed to do that and to steer you in the right directions. For someone who's struggling, I would say to them, firstly, know you're not alone. Know that there are resources out there. It's hard to know where those resources are because you search it into Google and you're hit with a wealth of different resources. I myself know in the years that I've been doing this, there is only one resource that is 100% accurate on the information that they put out there about psoriasis, and that is the Psoriasis Association in the UK. The reason why there are so many different resources online and even written journals, published medical journals, that they now contain inaccurate information is that the research is constantly evolving. Psoriasis, like many conditions, is one that they don't yet quite fully understand it completely. Obviously, they don't have a cure for it yet. They're still searching for that. Until that day comes, new information is coming out the whole time, new ways of thinking on it. Psoriasis, very commonly, you'll see is stated as a skin condition. And that's what they used to think it was. They now realize it's actually a systematic condition, which means it's an autoimmune condition, meaning that the problem is internal and that the markings on the skin are just a symptom or a side effect, a signal that there's something wrong on the inside. So that's why they call it systematic. They realize it doesn't just affect the skin now because it's internal, it affects other organs in the body as well as the skin. And that's why they say it's a systematic condition, that it impacts all those areas. But for that reason, you'll find loads of resources online and they refer to it as a skin condition. And straight away, I'm going, okay, I'm going to read everything now with a pinch of salt because I know that it's not up to date and it's not factually accurate anymore. The Psoriasis Association, as I said, they will go back and they will regularly revise their resources and the information they have out there with the latest information. They're constantly updating it. They've even got this fantastic resource, which unfortunately we don't have in Ireland, where A lot of the regular products that people would use to maintain their condition, sometimes they go in and out of availability. There's a very popular product called Cocoas that I'm sure a lot of people listening will know of, that it's an emollient, a tar emollient that is used to treat the scales. And that is always going in and out of availability because manufacturers just cannot manufacture it on the scale that they need to. So they'll regularly put up little posts saying to people, just so you know, Cocoas is out of stock at the moment. It can still be, or it can still be gotten here, or it's back. They put up updates like that. So it'd be great if we could have something like that. The Psoriasis Association are light years away from any of the services that we have here, but they're great for that, about finding out information about it. The Ask a Nurse helpline is great about speaking to someone about living with psoriasis within Ireland. And then, as I said, there's loads of resources outside of that. But as I said, I've gone through them with a fine tooth comb and I find problems with them all, except for the Psoriasis Association. Just so someone knows they're not alone, there is resources out there. There's a couple of ideas as to how to find it. You can't always get an audience with your doctor nowadays, unfortunately. And they say that your GP is the first port of call when it comes to a condition like psoriasis, because the most common form of psoriasis, plaque psoriasis, should be able to be managed by your GP. Then when it gets that you might have different forms of psoriasis, or maybe your psoriasis isn't reacting well to the treatment processes they've put you on, that's when you might need to be referred on to a specialist. So for the most part, you should be able to speak to your doctor. Unfortunately, with the way things are in the country at the moment, you can't pick up the phone and just speak to your doctor. They're not easily available like that, and there's long waiting lists. So your pharmacist is such an underutilized resource. They're the type of people that they see this all the time. They have products on their shelves that will help to alleviate the symptoms. Either, that's something you can continue using long term, or maybe you're going, I can't see my doctor for 2 months, but I have this terrible itch or burning. What can I use? They'll be able to advise you on something that you can use in the interim until you get to see the likes of a doctor or a specialist. So that's what I would say, is that there's people out there to help. If you're in doubt, look, it's great to do a Google and to find people like myself who have platforms or will be able to talk to you about, personal experience. But I kind of do deviate against from the doctor Google, because sometimes there's too much there and it's overwhelming. It's like you can walk into Boots or some other pharmacy where there's rows and rows of products and you just don't know where to start. So if you're looking for a little bit of guidance, I would say reaching out to one of those helpline services, reading into the information that they have on their website, or just popping into your local pharmacist. And I know that it is a thing that maybe people aren't forthcoming about. They don't want to be standing on the shop floor talking to someone about it or showing them it. All your pharmacists have a room in the back. I know, because I used to work in a pharmacy, where it's a private room where you can go and speak to the pharmacist in an area where you're away from the shop front, where people don't have to overhear a conversation. You can maybe even show them the lesions or whatever the symptom is that you're looking to alleviate. Talk to them about it in private and they'll be able to advise you. So that's what I would say to someone who's struggling at the moment, is to look into those options.
You've hit every single nail on the head there. Every time I had a question, you had an answer for me. So brilliant. Thank you so much. Just for a moment, I want to take a break from the pod to speak to you about Ostique Connect from Sol's Healthcare. One of the hardest things about living with a stoma or living with IBD can be the isolation that comes with it. I know from my own experience, chronic illness can be a very lonely place. I've been very vocal about the effect it had on me in my teenage years, and how my actual fear of getting a stoma and living life with a bag nearly ended up me not being here today. If I'd had a way to connect with other people who were living with IBD or they were living with a stoma, I could have learned from their lived experience. It would have eased so much the fear of what I was going through. Connecting and learning from another is exactly why I started this podcast, which is why I want to tell you about Ostique Connect by Salts. It's the first ever peer-to-peer support app for people who are managing gut health conditions. So whether you have a stoma now, maybe you'll have one in the future, or you've had one in the past, Ostique Connect has a bespoke algorithm that helps you meet people from all over the world. People who've been on a similar journey to your own. So through the app, you can make supportive connections and you can have one-to-one conversations. It also gives you the chance to join forums and connect with a larger group of people. You can ask and you can answer any questions that arise. It's a great place to provide support in a safe space. And there's also helpful blogs and there's podcast episodes too. Ostique Connect by Salts is available to download via the Apple App Store and Google Play. So if you want to check it out, click the links in the episode description or simply search Ostique Connect. Thanks for listening. Let's get back to the episode. I just want to dive into maybe your own protocol that you're following at the moment, because I've seen the photos that you shared before and it was really affecting through your scalp and very, very visible. Obviously, looking at you now, you're looking very glam. Everything looks good. What type of protocol are you following at the moment? I know you've dived into the more alternative stuff with your documentary. Do you do a combination of maybe, I'll say, conventional and alternative, or is there one specific route that works for you?
Yeah. Treatment is a tough one for me, in that I suppose before I started doing all the advocacy work, as I said, someone's main aim of treatment is different. For some people, obviously, it's to alleviate a symptom. for the most part, the symptom that people want to alleviate is the visual markings on the skin. And that's all down to the mental aspect of it, the fact that we don't want to look different, that we want to fit in, that we don't want to deviate from this beauty standard that's set on social media and in the media, everywhere else, that we have to have clear skin. So it's not a vanity thing. It's more to it than that, that the main symptom we want to alleviate is clearing the skin. That's the main symptom I used to aspire to clear by engaging in treatment and in management regimes. So for me, the reason why I engage in treatment regimes has changed. And for that reason, it's changed how I actually manage my symptoms. Nowadays, I'm not as focused and obsessed with clearing the markings on the skin. I'm very happy for people to see the markings on the skin. As I said, the lesions I've come to peace with. The flaking sometimes I feel can be an area of contention for me because I feel it's more misunderstood than the markings. I think that there's great movements happening online in the past few years where we're actually celebrating visual difference, where nowadays people who are visually different, because of different advocates, like we'll say the likes of Katie Piper and other people who have a big high status, that they don't look the norm. They're after given this platform where there's a leeway there where we're starting to go, well, maybe we don't have to all conform and look a certain way. But we're still very far away from that. But there's a little bit of a recognition there that, me wearing the markings on my skin, that's fine. People, maybe are coming around to that or might see it and think it's one thing or another. The flaking, I still think there's an association with the likes of dandruff, which people for some reason have this association in their head. It means that you're dirty or that you don't wash enough. So the flaking is one that I still would look to try and alleviate. Other symptoms that I would look to alleviate now is maybe like that. If I have burning or itch or something, they're symptoms that I'm not happy to live with. And they're the ones that I'm going to be looking at with treatment. But for me, I no longer wish to clear the markings on the skin. One, because I'm happy to live with them. And two, it's this imposter syndrome that I live with nowadays, where there's times of the year when my symptoms visually are not as noticeable or as extensive because of the time of the year. Everyone's psoriasis will be different. Their triggers will differ. For me, I have found that my psoriasis reacts very poorly to heat and to hot conditions, to sunlight. Some people are the complete opposite. So for me, it's like a cyclical thing every year. During the summer months, my psoriasis will be more visual, it'll be more aggressive. And then when I start going into the winter months, as we are now, my symptoms start becoming less visual and less extensive. So for that reason, I find during the winter, I don't have to do much maintenance because the level that symptoms are at, I'm happy to live with. I always think that when I'm looking at products for your psoriasis, I divide them into maintenance and into treatment products. Maintenance are the ones you use all the time to keep on bay of the symptoms and to keep them at that level that you want them at. The treatment products are the ones you're going to reach for if you have an issue, like you wake up one day and one of your plaques is after bursting open and it's oozing or something. That's when you're going to reach for them when you have a problem. But for me, I have this hesitancy I'm nearly afraid to use certain products nowadays that in the case they clear the markings on my skin, because then who am I? I feel like I'm letting the side down if I show up to events where people are going and they're excited to see Zoe Ryan with psoriasis. I'm aware there's people in the crowd who are thinking the way I once was, that you only love to see someone who looks like you. And maybe they're there hoping to see someone who looks like me, the me they've seen online, where they've seen the side where it's very extensive, as you said, the markings down the face and all over the body. And they're going, she's going to arrive now and it's going to help me to cope with my own. And then I arrive and I look like this and they're going, you sure that's her? Is that really her? Does she really have psoriasis? I don't know what's going on here. So as I said, I myself, sometimes I just think I have the worst mindset for it, where I'm afraid nearly sometimes to trial products. In my line of work, a lot of people send me products and they say, would you try this to test it out to see the impact on psoriasis? And I'm always more than happy to do that for brands, to provide them with real feedback on how it works for this condition. But I don't do it as much anymore. I need to get back into it. But I said it's because I've started to get into this hesitancy going, if I don't show up with psoriasis, people are going to be disappointed. They're not going to see themselves reflected in me. And then part of this ideal that I promote, it's not there. It's just me talking about it. Whereas I was at a conference recently and another psoriasis advocate who now is 90% clear because of the treatment path that she's on. But her story was so impactful that it didn't matter to me that I couldn't see the markings. I knew from her speaking and the descriptions, I could nearly visualize her covered in it. because I've been there myself. So it's something for me to maybe get over. But in regards to my current treatment path, as I said, I no longer engage in treatments that are going to necessarily with the aim of clearing the skin. I'm just trying to alleviate the symptoms that bother me, like the flaking, like if I wake up someday with uncontrollable itch or burning or something like that. And my advice to people with products is there's no point in me listing products or anything now, because with treatment, what I promote is that you should treat your symptom, not your condition. A red flag for me, if you walk into a shop and you see a queue of products and they have, for psoriasis on them, I'd be reading that one with a pinch of salt, because there's no pot that's going to address every symptom that someone might be having with psoriasis. If it is, they're definitely working some strange formula there. But generally speaking, it's that you go in thinking, okay, this is the symptom I'm looking to alleviate. Maybe it's redness. Maybe you're going, okay, I want something for redness. Or maybe it's a buildup of scale or plaque and you're going, I want something that's going to reduce that. I'd be going into the likes of your pharmacies and looking for a product that contains an ingredient that's going to do that. So for people looking to go, I'm not sure where to start, I'd ask yourself, what's my symptom that I'm looking to alleviate? And then maybe do a little bit of research into what ingredients in skincare products is typically going to address that. For instance, if someone is looking to get rid of a buildup of scale, you'd be looking for a product that contains urea, because urea is an ingredient that it's a dual action ingredient. So it's fantastic for people with psoriasis in that, depending on the percentage of urea that you have in a product, it'll perform a different action. So if you're getting a product that has less than 10% urea in it, it's going to have a very moisturizing, hydrating effect. Obviously great for someone who has dry skin, like those of us with psoriasis. But then if you go over the 10%, it has a cartolytic effect, which means that it has a kind of exfoliating action where it's going to help break down the scale. Now, in my experience, over 40% is what you need to be looking for, between over 30 and 40 to really get an exfoliating action. Anything up to then, it's going to be very slow exfoliating action that you're seeing. If you're looking for real results of breaking down that scale, I'd be saying go for a urea product that has over 30-40% urea in it. And that's going to help break down the scale. Then because it also has urea of the lower percentage, it's going to also help to moisturize and keep it hydrated. So that's what I would say to people, is that ask yourself, what's your symptom? What ingredient's going to address it? And that's how you kind of more accurately look for treatments. Something that I was doing for years is just anything anybody recommended, you go, yeah, that's grand, I'll buy it. Or anything you saw on the shelf that said psoriasis. And that's not a very targeted approach at managing or treating your symptom, because you're just putting a general product on and hoping it's going to address your particular issue. In order to have more success with management, I think you need to be more specific about what you're looking for and know what it is you're looking for. For me, as I said, I don't know what I'm doing half the time, but I nearly have this hesitancy now to apply products just in case they cleared the skin, which was something I once dreamed of. And now I'm nearly afraid of it, because I feel like then people won't see me as who I'm meant to be. So for me, my psoriasis and symptoms are at a level I'm actually happy to live with at the moment. But you can be sure that if I wake up and it's bothering me in some way, that I have an extensive cabinet of things that I can reach for to try and alleviate that particular symptom that's bothering me. But something I would say to people is that for some people, it's not a choice. There's certain forms of psoriasis that require maintenance that is of a medical persuasion. A couple of forms of psoriasis that you need to be hospitalized, because there is a fear of it turning fatal because of the way that it works. I won't get into the inner workings of it now. But for the likes of myself, someone who has predominantly plaque psoriasis, the main problem there is the visual with it. And then, as I said, all that, the burning, the itch, that type of thing. The burning itch, the flakes, that can all be maintained with your over-the-counter products. Doesn't necessarily need that more robust prescribed type of product going on. So I would say to a lot of people that if you could become a bit more at peace with the markings, I think you would find that the products that you're engaging in using, you'd think they're more effective. Because when I was first diagnosed and in the years that followed, the only reason why I engaged in any sort of management or maintenance was I wanted to clear the skin. And when it didn't do that, I was like, that product is no good, and discarded it and said that it didn't work. Whereas now I feel like there's a couple of products that I didn't give a good enough chance back then that maybe I should revise and say, maybe it actually was doing something. Maybe like that it was addressing the itch or some other aspect of it. But because I was just focused on clearing the skin, to me, it was no good. So I think, yeah, it's a case of giving products a good chance and looking into what they're actually meant to do before you deem them unacceptable, because you need to recognize that they're not magical powers. They'll all do a very specific thing, and you need to find the one that's going to do specifically what you want it to do.
100%. And I think the main thing to take from that is education. You have obviously educated yourself so much that you really understand what goes into these products and what is necessary to alleviate certain symptoms that might be presenting. We obviously live in a world now where products are 10 a penny, and there is so many things on every single shelf, no matter where you go. But I think when you really break it down into education and understanding what's in each product, you won't be fooled by the miracle cures that are out there. They
Mm.
promise everything, and as you said, maybe they're only there to alleviate the redness, maybe it's the itch. One thing with autoimmune conditions that I know from my own experience with it is, unfortunately, there can be an almost a domino effect that you get diagnosed at one, and then there is a list of maybe comorbidities that can come up. Is there, when it comes to treatment plans for yourself and looking after your total health, do you have to get regular checkups to make sure that there might not be issues that are presenting themselves alongside the psoriasis?
Yeah, something that I only recently was asked as well. And unfortunately, it's an area that they don't quite yet know much about. There is a study ongoing at the moment called the HPOS study. The purpose of that study is that they know that there is a link between psoriasis and a form of arthritis called psoriatic arthritis. So at present, approximately 30% of people with psoriasis will go on to develop psoriatic arthritis. Why? They're not 100% sure. They have some theories. They need to do more research to find out. They know there's a link, but they're not sure about the chicken and the egg situation. They're not sure if one feeds the other and so on. And that is the case with a lot of the comorbidities for psoriasis. As you mentioned there, it's an autoimmune condition. With a condition like psoriasis and any autoimmune condition, generally speaking, you're at a higher risk of developing other autoimmune conditions. So I live with another autoimmune condition myself called Raynaud's disease. And the fact that I have that, it's a case of going, okay, well, did she have the Raynaud's first or the psoriasis? Which one caused the other one to come along? A lot of people with diabetes have psoriasis. A lot of people with psoriasis they go on to have issues with cardiovascular disease, and there's a whole raft of, as you say, comorbidities, which are associated conditions. They are very afraid of saying that one directly caused the other. They recognize that there is a link and that they're associated. That's when they say they're associated conditions. And the reason why, as I said, they're afraid to say it is they don't actually know the direct science with it. They're not sure which one puts you more at risk and what the exact correlation is. So, for that reason, another thing that I have kind of dabbled with over the years or questioned myself was, over the years, obviously, my focus on treating my psoriasis was to clear the skin. A day came where I said, that's no longer why I wish to treat my psoriasis. So I'm not going to treat my psoriasis because I don't want to. And a question that I have often asked over the years is that by me not treating the markings on the skin, am I doing more damage than good? And the answer that I've always got is no. If you're happy to live with the symptoms of the condition, like the markings on the skin, the flake, and whatever, then there's no need for you to treat it. So I was like, okay, that's fine. So for years I was going, okay, well, I don't need to go back to the dermatologist or the specialist because I'm not interested in the treatments that they are offering me. Because as I said, the main aim or goal of treatments from their point of view is with the aim to clear the skin. And this is something that I discussed. I actually posed this question to a panel at the Psoriasis Awareness Conference this year. And they kind of were taken aback. I was like, "Oh, what's the reason why we treat psoriasis? You've said it's to clear the skin. And I'm just wondering, is the reason why you're, focused on clearing the skin, is that because, if the skin is clear, that means that you've effectively addressed and suppressed the internal problem. That's why the markings aren't coming to the surface anymore, because you have that inflammation internally at bay." They kind of looked and they were like, well, that's a good way to look at it. But I mean, the reason why we want to clear the skin is because that's what the patient wants. The patients want clear skin. So that's why we've developed products, and that's why we focus our research on that aspect. And I was like, to me, it didn't seem like a good enough answer. You know, when I first was diagnosed, I said I didn't know anything about it and I didn't have any interest in it. Then I decided some years later to create the platform, and I kind of became a little bit obsessed with the topic, and I wanted to know more and more. I suppose it's down to maybe whatever your learning kind of preference is. For me, by knowing what it was, I was able to accept it, better management. As you said, I got a purpose in life that I was like, right, well, I now need to help people with this. So I felt over the years I was getting more and more questions from people, and a lot of people turned to me instead of turning to their pharmacist or their doctor. I suppose I'm a lot more accessible. I'm on a phone, I'm at the end of it. They've built that rapport with me. They're consuming my media. They're speaking to me. They like me. They're going, she knows what she's talking about. I feel like I can talk to her. I'm going to ask her these questions. And I found over the years, I was getting increasingly more questions that maybe I didn't feel quite comfortable to answer. If you ask me questions about what's it like living with it, or how did you manage this? What did you think of that product? But when people started asking me questions that they want to know more about the actual condition, the inner workings of it, why certain treatments will be recommended for certain forms, I felt like I needed to get more information on that myself. I felt to do those people that trust me justice and to let them know that I'm actually qualified to speak on this and I can actually stand by the title that I self give myself is that I'm an expert on this condition. I need to make myself an expert. So I've gone back in recent years and I've done a number of different courses in the area. Most recently, after having to cut down a lot of red tape, I was accepted to do a course in UCD School of Medicine through the Charles Institute of Dermatology. As I said, that one was a couple of years trying to break down doors because I felt like because I didn't have a pre-existing medical degree, it was really hard for me to get in with it. I have a master's, but in radio and television broadcasting. And something that someone said to me a couple of years ago when I first started looking into it was going, I really want to do a course. It's going to arm me with the knowledge and so that I can let people know that I know what I'm talking about and that I have the blue tick, that you see on Twitter and everything about that I'm, qualified, I'm above board and everything. And they said to me, you're going to come against a lot of problems with that because, and this was someone who worked in the world. They said, they pointed over, I remember, to a dermatology building. And they were like, they don't want us in their sphere. They don't want us to know certain things. They don't want to let us in into the inner workings. And I can understand it to a certain extent. I think with a lot of medical professionals, especially ones from times of old, there was this thinking of doctor says, patient does. The doctor's the one with all the information and the knowledge, and the patient just blindly goes along with it and doesn't question it. Those days are gone. And we've seen that there's been many studies carried out where that collaborative work with the patient and the doctor has led to far better outcomes. When it's been proven that when the patient understands and feels like they have a say in this, that they've better outcomes with it. So that's a way of thinking that a lot of medical professionals are hesitant to go towards. They like keeping their cards close to their chest and going, well, I'm the one who knows. The patient's not meant to understand. So they were like, you're going to find it hard. And I did. And it was only when I was speaking at a conference a number of years ago alongside dermatologists, research specialists. And afterwards, we were all speaking afterwards amongst each other. And I think it's when people speak to me and they realize I do know what I'm talking about. I'm not merely a patient. They start to give me their time and they go, I'll actually listen to this girl. And luckily, a professor in UCD School of Medicine listened to me. I told him I wanted to do a course. I told him my reasons. It's because I want to continue doing this work and I want to be able to do the people that I'm speaking on behalf of justice and that I actually understand this from the science to the side I now know, which is the lived experience. I want to know the science, the medicine side of it. And luckily, when a course was developed along the years that there was no prerequisite for you to have a medical degree, or at least they helped me get in that way. And they did me a solid there and they got me in. So I recently graduated from the Charles Institute. And so now I can say that I actually have that greater understanding. So for me now, and when I was at that conference during the summer, I went, the science tells me that by not treating this, by not addressing the internal inflammation, I am doing more damage than good. As I said, I no longer treat the markings on the skin because I'm happy with them. But when I think of what psoriasis is, which is it's an autoimmune condition, and one of the side effects is that it's causing this overproduction of skin cells, which then come to the surface and it leads to this buildup of scale. You're going, okay, well, if I'm not addressing the internal inflammation, surely it will be like a wildfire that it's raging and it's causing destruction in its path. And when you now think of the understanding that psoriasis is a systematic condition, which is they now recognize, okay, it's a condition where there's internal inflammation in the body that's having a knock-on effect of all the organs, that's when you start to think, by me not treating the markings on the skin, am I doing more damage than good? So it's an area that they don't quite yet understand. As I said, this question was only posed to me at a conference the other day where they're like, do you think by not treating it, you're doing damage? I was like, I do. I do think so. But unfortunately, every time I've sought the reassurance from a medical professional, they have reassured me, no, if you're happy to live with the symptoms, it's fine. And you're going, I think we need to do more research on this. I think that we need to be addressing the inflammation, whether the person's happy to live with the markings or not. And fair enough, if maybe you say to us we all should be on a treatment path and it's going to address the internal inflammation, and maybe a knock on effect is that it's clearing the skin, all well and fine. But I think that the problem lies with the fact that when you go into a dermatology appointment or specialist or anything, their focus is on the skin and it's on clearing the skin. And I understand it because, as I said, most people aren't born with psoriasis. It's something you develop along the way. And for that reason, the person who has been diagnosed with it, they want back what they had. And for the most part, the most pressing symptom is, in fact, the markings on the skin. As I said, there's cases of psoriasis that you need to be hospitalized. There's a form called erythrodermic, where you literally wake up head to toe, your fluids are imbalanced in the body and they need to be balanced out. Otherwise, it can prove fatal. So for some people, it's not a choice. I recently was speaking to another advocate where she said to me, I would love to embrace the markings on my skin and do what you do. But unfortunately, it's not an option for me because I have been hospitalized 3 times because I became erythrodermic within a short period of time. And they have to keep me on this medication, which coincidentally clears my skin. But I have to be on it because if I'm not, then, it could prove fatal for me. And with her, she was saying that there's a lot of side effects, negative side effects to those more robust treatments, the likes of your systematics and your biologics, the injectable and the oral medications, the things that address the internal inflammation. There's knock-on effects to them that aren't desirable to some people. I've been offered over the years where dermatologists have said to me, would you like to try the systematics? I'm like, no, I'm happy to live with the markings on the skin. I don't want to clear them. So, I don't want to go down those routes because they have side effects that I'm not willing to take on. For some people, the side effects, knowing that you're a higher risk of developing certain cancers because you're taking these medications, they go, okay, well, that's okay. I am happy to live with that because it's better than the alternative, which is living with the symptoms. That's why I very heavily promote that if you're okay to live with the symptoms, maybe don't engage in the medication. If we could move our mindsets, if we could make peace with the fact that we have these markings on the skin, people maybe wouldn't be consuming these products, which aren't always the best to be on, and they're not suitable for long-term use. People who are on the likes of systematics and biologics, they need to regularly be moved off them and moved on to different ones because they're not suitable to be left on for a long time. In some cases, they need to regularly get blood tests taken to be checking that everything's okay there. So there's something going on there that they're not necessarily the best things to be on. So I always say, if you can not be on them, try not to be. But maybe I'm wrong in that way, thinking, Jonathan. Maybe my promotion of people to say be okay with the markings on the skin. We're all just ignoring the fact that being okay with the markings on the skin, we're not addressing the internal inflammation. So for me, I try to address the internal inflammation in ways I'm happy to do so through lifestyle choices, through the foods that I'm consuming. Some people say, there's a lot of areas of contention there about, does the food affect it? I think if you think of a plant, if you leave a plant and it's unwatered, we all know what happens. Sometimes you can see a plant that it's near its end of life and you pour water on it and suddenly it's back to life. So I think it's undeniable that what we put in has a direct effect on the outside. So I do believe that what we put into our body is very important. So I think that by being cautious of what you're eating, trying to eat foods that are going to address that internal inflammation, avoiding foods that aren't going to aggravate it, like spicy foods, etc., that's all going to help with it. But I suppose until they know better, what can we do as patients? We just have to go along with what we're being told. Definitely keep questioning, keep forcing them to answer that question and say, what should we be doing here? But the current guidance is that if you're happy to live with the symptoms, if you're not in a scenario where like that, if you have psoriatic arthritis, obviously they want to get you on a treatment platform as soon as possible because they don't want any irreversible damage to be done to the joints. So for that case, that's a form of psoriasis that really needs medical attention. But for the most part, they're going, if you're okay to live with it, then you don't need to be engaging in the more robust treatment platforms. But I would like to see more information being revealed to us as patients to say, if you're choosing this treatment regime or a lack of treatment regime, what is that impact? Are you doing more damage than good? And I think until we know that, we're not actually going to know the implications of our actions. Same as with the COVID jab that we got there a few years ago. People were going, well, we don't know by taking this what's going to happen in 20 years' time because no one from 20 years ago can tell us. Their body's not there to be studied to see what effect it had. So we just have to go with what we're hearing. an advocate I recently spoke to said that, for a long time she was ignoring her symptoms and her symptoms were very severe. And she can't help but wonder now that she has psoriatic arthritis, that she has cardiovascular disease, that she has metabolic syndrome. She can't help but go, is it because I left it untreated for so long? Is that what has caused this? And unfortunately, we don't know. And I think you just have to keep going with what you're happy with and what you feel is the right thing to be doing at this time. If you have questions around that and you're going, oh God, maybe I should be looking into it, look into it, inquire about if there is something that you should be doing. But I do think that managing your lifestyle, I know, yeah, live a healthy, balanced lifestyle. We all hate to hear it because it's not very specific, is it? It is something that I think you just have to engage in until they tell us more. I hate when you say, is there something I should be doing or equally avoiding? And they say, just live a healthy, balanced lifestyle, consume these foods, drink your water, do your exercise. But maybe there's something to be said to it. So until we know better, try and live a healthy, balanced lifestyle. And hopefully the science and the research will follow and that we'll be able to be advised more specifically into what we should be doing.
Completely. And just circling back to what you're saying, when it comes to symptoms, they're undeniable evidence of an issue, like cause and effect. And the fact that the symptoms are treated, but not the root cause, and that's the modern day approach for, I won't say almost all autoimmune conditions. I don't know enough about them, but I know from my own experience, there's a lot of blanket statements that go on these things, and there shouldn't be any blanket statements on them. Our experience with autoimmune conditions, whether it's psoriasis or it's IBD in my own case, is completely individual. And that's why certain medications don't work. Certain approaches work for me, wouldn't work for others, and likewise for yourself and others who might be suffering. But I think what you've done to go and educate yourself and the little light bulb moment to go, oh, there's something else going on here. Obviously, the issue with my skin is showing me that there's an underlying condition here that is active. And how am I going to get in here and tackle this? So it's a brilliant thing that you went in and learned. And as you said, there's definite a change coming in the way the approach to medicine is coming. There's the old way of being like, shut up and take what I tell you, versus now we're so educated, we have a real understanding of what's going on, and nobody will know your body like you know your body. Obviously, a medical professional can read off a textbook and they understand what the condition is, but your lived experience of that condition could be very different to what's written in text. The text is obviously describes the condition, but doesn't describe what you're going through. So definitely, I think that advocation, and obviously advocating with the practitioners as well, to say, change has to come. We have to have an understanding of what's going on here. And circling back to what you said earlier about the kind of mental health side of it and the lack of empathy in the delivery of these things, we understand that the healthcare system is completely overburdened and overwhelmed, and cause and effect from that. There's obviously a problem. There's areas which are being left uncovered and people are falling through the cracks and hurting mentally and physically. What I would always say from my own experience is what we put in mentally and what we put in physically through food and stuff like that can have an effect. And like you said, about the plant and water in it, we have to develop protocols, for a lack of a better word, in our own life to manage everything that's going on. Do you find that any protocols work for looking after the mental? I know stress is completely a trigger for mine. Do you find stress is a trigger for yours? Like, is there something you put into practice to minimize that effect?
Yeah, the triggers is an area of contention for me. There are known triggers of psoriasis. I like to divide them into triggers and aggravators. I think triggers are things, aspects that trigger that initial instance of psoriasis in a person because it is something that an onset happens. And then I think aggravators are things that throughout your lifetime, then you'll find worsen the symptoms. And for me, a trigger and an aggravator can be different and they can change. So for me, like yourself, I was doing my leaving certificate when I first started showing symptoms of scalp psoriasis. And at that time, I was under immense stress because I was also a very studious person and I took the leaving cert very seriously. And so I was under a lot of pressure and stress at that time. And I do admit that that's obviously what caused it to erupt in my body, is that level of stress, because the known aggravators or triggers of psoriasis are a stressful or traumatic event, injury or damage to the skin. There's a form of psoriasis that very commonly erupts out if you have injury or damage to the skin. Certain infections. There's another form of psoriasis that generally will come about after someone has streptococcal throat. Then there's the coming off or going on of certain medications can trigger it in the body as well. So for me, what you might have found was your initial trigger might not be the thing that aggravates it or equally alleviates it down the line. As I said, for me, I have come to found from keeping a symptom journal and logging and trying to decipher what is causing this, because I used to find I couldn't pinpoint it at all. I used to be like, There's times when it's worse, when it's flaring. There's other times where it's calming down. I'm doing nothing different. I'm doing the same management regime. Why is it it's working sometimes and not others? So I found keeping a symptoms journal and logging everything that you even wouldn't even notice might have an impact. As you said, it's logging things like about, okay, what did I eat today? What products did I put on my body today? What was the weather like today? What's my mental state like? Did I consume enough water? Did I consume any alcohol? What was my sugar like? So it's all those factors play a part in feeding into how your symptom is going to be at the time or how your condition is going to be. So for me, I was able to identify that it doesn't like heat. That means that if I want to go on a foreign holiday and sit out into the sun, I know that I'm going to experience a flare. If I eat a really spicy hot curry, I know it's going to have a flare. And I don't believe that your condition should stop you from doing the things that you want. I believe that the way to happy life with your condition, because for a long time for me, it was like it was me versus my psoriasis. I was constantly fighting it. I was constantly telling it, I don't want to hear what you want to say. I'm going to do what I want to do, and you're just going to have to put up with it. That's not a good mentality and it does not work. I've tried it. What I have found, better success is if you listen to your condition. If you say, okay, I'm going to do something and I'm going to see what effect it has on it, like that, I'm going to eat a certain food. How did my psoriasis react to it today? What were my symptoms like? Were they worse? Were they better? Was it that caused it? So there's a lot initially to figure out what your triggers are. There's a lot of having to think and to document everything, and it can be tedious. But in the long term, it helps you because you can then go, okay, I've discovered the things my psoriasis doesn't like, the things it does like. I and it are going to have a bit of an agreement here where I'm going to say, right, I like doing the things you don't like. I like going on foreign holidays. I like eating spicy curries. So I'm going to do that, but I'm going to know what I'm getting myself into if I do it. And I'm going to have the things at hand that I know are going to counteract it, like that. If I'm going abroad, I know to be bringing a thermal water spray with me everywhere, because the second I arrive, I'm going to start feeling like I'm crawling all over and I'm going to spritz myself with the spray to stop the itch. If I have a hot curry tonight, you be sure in the next few days I'm going to be consuming loads of greens, cucumbers, cooling foods like natural yogurts to try and suppress that heat that I've put inside my body. So for me, with the triggers, I think it's good to know what they are, but I don't think you should be restricted and confined to them. I think it's about compromise and it's about balance. But something I found interesting that you said was that with a lot of these conditions, they're masking it the whole time. They're doing a bit of a cover up job. They're just about they're suppressing it. That's what they're doing. Like even with psoriasis, because there's no cure, they don't know how to fix the internal problems. So, but they figured out ways to suppress it, to dampen it. And with any of the products and the treatments that you're on, like the systematics or the biologics, they're just suppressing the symptoms. And when people come off them, some people find straight away, other people find it takes a little while for it to come back full blown. I have a friend who has Crohn's and she's living abroad at the moment. And she has found in the past that there's been times where maybe she thought she was going to get home quicker than she did and that she wouldn't run out of her medication. But she did. And then she found that in the weeks following, it took a little while for the symptoms to start creeping in. And then she was like, right, I need to get home and I need to get my prescription topped up because it's creeping in again. So for people, they find that it's suppressing it and then it does come back the way that it was. So they're not suitable for long term. Fair enough. They're going to suppress the symptoms that are maybe troubling you at the time. But there's a lot of kind of thinking around this, and I won't get too much into conspiracy theories. But, a lot of people think that the reason why they keep creating these products and maybe don't seek to do other ones is that it's keeping the pharmaceutical company going. These products are really expensive. And, to be dishing them out and to give them in the dose they do, they're making a lot of money on it. So it's within their best interest that they don't actually find cures for us. Now, I refer to that as a conspiracy theory because I know from working in the sphere that I do, there is a lot being done in the research area. There's a lot of people out there who are actively still focused on looking for the cure, and they're a little bit uninterested in the pharmaceutical companies. It's like they're working side by side. So I wouldn't be maybe buying into that. But I do think that, as you said, a lot of these conditions, they don't focus on the root of the cause. That's where they should be. They're not looking at addressing the root. They're looking at masking or covering up the other symptoms. Maybe it's because they know they can't do the others. They're going, we'll do what we can at this moment until the research and the science catches up and maybe we can do more. So that's a possibility. But with the triggers, I think it's very valuable to know what your triggers or aggravators are. but not to be, as I say, too rigid with them, to know what they are and to kind of live your life around them, not to be letting them control you and say, well, you can't do this or you can't do that. You are the one in control. And with a condition like psoriasis, it can feel like you're not in control. The time when I felt like I really had no control over it was when I remember there's a certain period where I was like, I give it a really good go at trying these treatments and sticking rigidly to them. Because sometimes, when I was first diagnosed as a teenager, I was just finishing my leaving cert. I was going into college. I was going off to college. And what I would do is I would engage in the treatment processes at the weekend because I needed someone to assist me with the application of all the products because I couldn't see everywhere that they were to be applied. So a parent was entrusted to do that. And they would do that at the weekend. I would endure all the treatments. And then I'd go off to college. And it's not that I forgot about it, but I'd put it to the back of my mind and I wouldn't engage in management or treatment processes all week. I would just do it at the weekend. So that probably wasn't enough to keep the symptoms at bay. So there was a period of time when I said, I'm going to give it a good go and I'm going to really follow it rigidly the way I'm meant to. And my symptoms were the worst they have ever been in my entire life during that process of me going from one product to the other, testing it, trialing it, doing everything I was meant to. So for people struggling, I would say just know that you can do everything right and still experience a flare because at the end of the day, autoimmune conditions have a mind of their own. You can do something that they've been liking all along, and then out of nowhere, they've decided that they don't like it anymore or they can just act up. And we don't know what causes that. Like that, it could be as simple as, as I said, factors like the weather. It didn't like the weather today or whatnot. So don't put the blame on yourself. Know that it's an autoimmune condition that you don't have full control over, but you do have some control over some aspects. As you said, take control of the aspects you can about engaging in your healthy lifestyle tactics, about trying to get in your fitness, trying to do the things that you're meant to make it all right. But for me, I found that, as I said, my initial trigger was stress. And then there was a time in my life after that where it was definitely the most stressed I'd ever been since the leaving cert. And it was the only time in the past 10 years that my symptoms went into a fully remissive state, which means that they were non-existent. You couldn't see the visual symptoms of my condition anymore. That doesn't mean that I was cured. That is a mistake a lot of people do. And I see there's one particular influencer that every time her psoriasis goes into a remissive state, she's on and she's saying, oh my God, I'm cured. And then a few weeks later, she's crying because the symptoms are back. And it's because she wasn't cured. The symptoms went into a remissive state, which means they weren't as obvious, or sometimes you can go into fully remissive, which is that they're completely gone. And that was a time that I was arguably stressed out of my mind and my psoriasis reacted well to it, whereas it previously had been triggered by the stress. So I think that your triggers can change throughout your lifetime. Try and identify what they are now. You might find down the line that they change again, but it's good to manage the triggers, but just not be a slave to them, to know that you're the one that's in control. And even though it's unpredictable sometimes, you can try and get back on top and take the control again.
Completely, and the fact that it's your disease or the thing you're experiencing is just a label. You are not defined by what you're experiencing. Obviously, you're probably more defined by your reaction to what you're experiencing. And if you're happy to go and have a curry, but you know what the effect is going to be, then just live in it and accept your decision. Because I know myself fighting that decision, like, oh, why did I do that? Oh my God, I knew it was going to happen. You're putting yourself under so much more duress. Whereas if you absolutely just give yourself a bit of peace and say, I know what's going to happen here, but I'm going to deal with repercussions. Or in the same sense, I know what's going to happen here, so I'm not going to do it. It's just just being you and deciding in that moment what exactly you need to do. Is there any thoughts that you'd like to share on your whole experience throughout the years of living with this and maybe what your plans would be for the future? Another thing that just slightly off topic before I go back to that, the lack of empathy with medical professionals has been a theme of this podcast. Eventually down the line, I've spoken to, and it's mainly with women, is that they feel disregarded by medical professionals and they feel not heard or being told that it's all in their head a lot of the time if they're not fitting into certain boxes. Eventually down the line, this could be in a year's time, I don't really know, but I'd like to get a lot of the people together to have maybe a circle table to speak about it, and then what change that they to practical advice, rather than saying and going on and bitching about things that go on. You get very practical advice. You understand the other side of the practitioners and what's going on there. Like everyone's under such duress. But I think eventually down the line, that type of a conversation with practical advice on how the system should change through everyone's lived experience, if that was something that you're interested in talking about eventually.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you're diagnosed with a condition that is a lifelong condition. There's a lot of anger there. As I said, there's a lot of trying to clutch back onto the life that you had. There's a lot of disbelief. I know myself because I was in denial for a number of years where I refused to believe that this was something that I would have to live with. And I think for me, it was because the onset was so sudden and abrupt. It wasn't something I lived with my whole life and come to terms with. It was that when I was 18, this thing happened. I assumed it was something that could easily be fixed. The shock was when I was told it couldn't be easily fixed. And then I went, well, I don't want to live this way. Surely they're wrong. Surely they can fix this. And so for a long time, I was in that despair and disbelief. And you adapt a very negative opinion towards doctors and medical professionals. And that's down to your experiences with them. And as I said, I have had experiences over the years with medical professionals that have been positive. And those are the ones that have changed my view on medical practitioners and has helped me to maybe see things from their side and give me that understanding. But I do recognize as well that I'm treated starkly different when I enter a space as a patient and as an advocate. That is something I can say with certainty. I have never been spoken to in the way that I have as a patient, as an advocate, and vice versa. And as a patient, I always felt like that. I was dismissed by the doctors, that they were just trying to get me out of there as quick as possible onto the next person. Any questions that I may have had were maybe shot down. I wasn't given the time because they didn't have it to give. I felt like they were on the clock when I was in there. And as we've spoken about today, that's understandable because we understand the way the health system is. The health system should not be that way, but it is. We're in this situation. When life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. It's hard to do that in the moment. And a lot of people who are patients have very negative experiences with doctors for it. And it's like that. It's when you meet a doctor who's not like that, it reforms them in your head and you start thinking otherwise. The first doctor who diagnosed my condition has said I was very unhappy with how that whole experience went. And I said, I'm getting a second opinion. And luckily, my mother had taken the lead with my management and treatment at the start because I was just a teenager and I wasn't interested and I was too busy. I was focused on going to college. And her and the women in work, anyways, pooled together and they were thinking of ideas. And someone had come up with that there was seemingly a GP in a nearby town who had a special interest in skin related issues like psoriasis. And they said, he's the man to get to. He's very busy. You obviously won't be added to his regular GP service. He'll see you as a once off to see what he can do. So I went along to this GP. And the experience I had with him was so starkly different from the experience I had with the lady who had diagnosed me. He reassured me, he confirmed, yes, you do have this condition that that other person told you about, but it's not as severe as they said. You have more options than they said you did in regards to treatment. And he just put me at ease as an 18-year-old girl that, made me feel like it was all going to be okay. But I suppose still even out of that, I did what he said, but I still had this little feeling in me that, nah, it's definitely not incurable. There's a cure out there and I go find it. But it's only through the years of, I suppose, working with medical professionals in an advocacy stance and as a psoriasis expert. As I said, I used to find doctors very dismissive of me. And now I find myself on, national TV shows sitting on a couch beside a doctor. And I remember the first few times it's going, I'm going to have to bite my tongue here because I don't want to be dismissive on local radio or on national TV towards this medical professional. But I want to get across what I have to say, which is that I do not feel that they listen to their patients or that they treat them in the way they should. And I feel like I generally come out of interviews having got that across and I'm going, no, I feel this way towards you, but I also now from working with these people see it from another side. But I can't help but think they treat me the way they do as an advocate because I'm an advocate. I'm someone they respect. I go into spheres now where people of that level are start to see me as a peer, as an equal, as a colleague, not as I say a mere patient. And I use that term loosely because there's nothing wrong with patients. But I do strongly believe that an expert is a person who has both the knowledge and the lived experience on something. I don't think anybody should be referred to as an expert unless they have both of those things. So sometimes I hear people coming on the radio and on the TV and they're doctors and they're on to talk about a medical condition. And as someone who formerly worked as a producer on a radio show, I know exactly why that has happened. they're terrified of liable. They're going to get someone on that they know has that blue tick beside their name saying, well, I know anything they say about this condition is factually correct and no repercussions is going to come for us because of it. They're not going to say something that's wrong. Whereas you could get a patient on and there could be some hostility on or something. Someone once said to me that advocates are known for being difficult to work with. I'm like, well, of course we're difficult to work with. We're disruptive purposely because we have to be brought into a space and tell you what you're doing is wrong. You're thinking along the wrong track. Had you asked the patient ages ago before you did something, we would have said that's the wrong way to do it. So patient advocates by nature, we have to be disruptive. But we have to be respectful as well, because I'm involved in a lot of different patient groups. And whenever we have a point to make, I'm going, that's fine. But when you're talking to the HSE, you make sure you go in there respectful, reverent, speak in a way that's not too abrupt and aggressive, because we want them to know they can work with us. Don't go in all guns. We'll hit you with the all guns blazing once we're in. But to get in, sometimes we have to play nice and we have to say the things that we want them to hear. So with the medical professionals, I've come around to seeing things from their side of view. And what's helped that, as you said, is because I now know the science. I understand why they can't do certain things, because you're going, oh, okay. Like, for instance, when I was there going, how come they can't cure the psoriasis? I now know why they can't cure the psoriasis. So I'm not angry at you anymore for not knowing how to cure the psoriasis. So I think understanding from their side definitely helps you to develop a better, perspective on the medical professionals. But definitely, I do think work has to be done there. I think there are medical professionals that they give off a certain air of hierarchy, and maybe they're clinging on to that thing of the doctor knows better, and they don't want to work with patients. There's a lot of doctors now that are coming around to the new way of seeing that working with patients is actually far more beneficial. Like that, as I said, I'm involved in a lot of patient groups, and the purpose of us is that the likes of the HSE and other organizations go, well, we offer this service to patients. And it's not really working out, and we don't really know why. And we're going, oh, well, it's because, whatever. And they're going, that's so obvious, but I never knew. This is why it's really valuable to have the patient themselves, the person who's undergoing this, the person who's coming into these spheres. Accessibility things, I mean, we're not looking into that today, but like even things like about things being wheelchair accessible. Sometimes people build things not having that in mind. Like that, as you said, the doctors there and thing in a textbook, they go, that's how it should be. But what's it actually like in reality? An architect could say, well, they tell us the dimensions are this for the wheelchair door. And then a wheelchair goes, yeah, but I know that's it. But actually, if you take into, they're going, oh, I didn't realize that. So there's value in recognizing us for who we are, experts in our area. And I suppose why I felt like I had to go and do further education and acquire the degrees that I have was, one, because, as I said, I felt I owed it to the people that I'm speaking on behalf of and providing information to, that I can say, well, it's all above board. I know what I'm talking about. But I also felt like I wasn't being invited into the spheres that I should have been. I was listening to radio shows and TV shows where doctors were being asked questions that I thought would have been more suitably asked to a patient. But they were asking the doctor because they're going, we're not getting a patient on. They're loose cannons. God knows what they could say. So that's why at some point I said, well, how about a hybrid? How about if I create what is every producer's dream? It's a person who has the medical knowledge and the lived experience. So me, who has both the knowledge and as a patient. So that was another reason why I said I wanted to get these degrees behind me, so that hopefully I'd be the one asked on the show instead of the doctor. I'm not saying that the doctor doesn't bring a valuable aspect to it. I just have an issue sometimes with the questions they answer. Sometimes the question posed will be like, what's it like living with psoriasis? And they'll proceed to answer. And I've no problem with them saying, well, from what we hear in clinic or from what my patients say. But generally it's like, oh, yeah, no, you're going, you don't, well, maybe you do know, but I'm just assuming you don't know. The best people in the world that I've ever encountered are medical professionals who have the condition themselves. And I love those people. I love when you meet a GP who has psoriasis or a dermatologist who has psoriasis, because I'm going to trust everything you say because you know what you're talking about from both a medical stance and a lived experience stance. So they're the only people I think should be assigned and hailed with the title of expert. I think outside of that, fair enough, you're a specialist or whatnot in your area, but you're not an expert unless you have that lived experience. So I think people like ourselves are underutilized in a way, and that we need to be brought into the conversation more than we currently are.
Completely. And that's absolutely the power of open dialogue, because there's definitely a lack of understanding from the patient to the practitioner, from the practitioner to the patient. No one's seeing each other's point or
No.
not understanding why aren't they listening to me? Why aren't they understanding what I'm saying? So there is two sides to the coin, absolutely. And I think it's an amazing thing that you've done is you've created a bridge that didn't previously exist between both sides of the river where people are getting lost and, we're shouting across at each other and the sounds are getting drowned out. So what you're doing is amazing. I hope you should be very proud of everything that you're doing because it's exceptional. You mentioned earlier about breaking down doors. I don't think there's a door you possibly couldn't break down. So fair play to you. It's been absolutely amazing talking to you, and I feel we've covered so many topics. I really appreciate you taking the time today. Is there anything else you'd like to finish on?
No, I think we've covered it. But as I said earlier, thank you so much for having me on today. I think it is really important that we have podcasts of this nature. As I said, there is this movement which is really good to see over the past number of years where we have people coming in saying that we should be embracing these things that make us different. We should be highlighting them as strengths rather than weaknesses, that they're not something that we should feel makes us damned, that we should find power in them. And as I say, reclaiming that power. So I'm delighted to be part of a series like this where you touch on areas and topics that people could get very down on. Being told that you live with an incurable condition, that in itself is a devastating blow. And it's up to people like ourselves who have gone through it and have come out the other end of the darkness and into the light. It's up to us to steer the way for people and to say, this is how I got out of it. This is how you can help yourself to get out of it. Because I think it's easy to fall into that life where you get down into it and the woe is me and this is a terrible situation to be in. It is. I was recently at a conference and the other advocate that was speaking said, this is a horrible disease. And sometimes because I no longer view it as a horrible disease, I forget that it is. It is a horrible disease to be living with. But like anything, you can have a negative or a positive outlook on life. I and yourself and other people who do the work that we do, we've made a decision to say, let's take something that's bad and make it something good. Let's use our trauma and our experience of life with this horrible thing to help other people. That's something that we've decided to do because we've realized, you know what? Life is actually better if you just accept that this is the way it is. And let's find ways of living in a way that you're happy and that it doesn't have to be as bad as it is. And we try and drag people with us to that side so that they can live that way too. So I'm delighted to be part of this podcast series. And as I said in my very first question, when you first approached me about it, I said, I don't know if I'm the right person for this because I'm no longer in that headspace. But I feel by going back into it, I've realized actually, you said I should be proud of myself. I've come a long way from when I was first diagnosed to where I am now. Never in my wildest dreams could I imagine that I'd be showing people the markings that I was once so embarrassed about. Never mind getting up on international stages and promoting and showing people pictures of myself and talking about the condition. So it's given me purpose. And as I said, I've become obsessed with psoriasis. I often say to people, if I could speak about psoriasis all day, every day, I'd be a happy person. So for me, maybe that is what the next step is. I've always, first and foremost, being a radio and television broadcaster. That's what I love doing. When I first looked into trying to do college degrees on this, I came across a lot of tape because they were afraid I'd want to maybe be a clinician or that I'd want to practice. I was like, going, I can't explain to you that I have no desire to actually treat patients. I just want to do what I love doing, which is being an advocate, a radio and a television presenter, but one that has a speciality and an expertise in this area, and that I can confidently say that and work in that sphere. So I don't have a desire to practice medicine. I have a desire to be an expert on psoriasis in radio and TV and to use the skills, I suppose, and the resources I have as a broadcaster to further the advocacy work. So, yeah, it's something that over the past few years, I've always said, and people say to me, they say, oh my God, you do so much with the page and you work a full-time job and you do this. How do you keep it all up? And for me, I actually don't think I do enough with the page. I've always been saying that there's more. I'd love to do more. And I'm always saying if I only had more time. So something that's a goal for me is that down the road, maybe I want to keep being a radio and television broadcaster, but I've worked in sport for 6 years. I do an art show. If someone could give me a show where I could talk about like that, different chronic conditions, psoriasis, health, wellness, all of that, that's the sphere I'd love to get into. I'd love to be a broadcaster in that area so that I suppose I could marry my two passions and loves, which is radio and TV, as well as talking about psoriasis. So for me, that's the next step. It's trying to keep going down the route I'm on and saying, how do I make it that my everyday love and passion could be marrying those two things that I love doing? So that's probably what's next for me. It's about thinking, how can I make this what I do more than what I do as a side project or as a kind of hobby? It's not a hobby. I do think that my advocacy work is a big part of my working life. But I do sometimes have moments where I'd love to attend all these conferences and speak on behalf of the advocates, but I have commitments at work. So it's about trying to figure out maybe how I could, as I say, marry the two of them and be the advocate that I want to be on the scale that I want to be, as well as maintaining that career that I want.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing. Like you're really turning your passion and pain into purpose, which is a beautiful thing to do. And I hopefully watch this space. Let's see what the future holds. We want to see this up on television.
Definitely, yeah, that's the goal.
Yeah, getting highlighted in the places it needs to be, because the more we broadcast and the more we get the word out there to other people, the less alone a lot of people feel. And I think that's amazing about the work that needs to be done. And thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your story so succinctly and so clearly. And it's a brilliant thing. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, because I do believe, as you said there, that the more we see and the more we hear about something, that's how acceptance comes about. There's a lot of things over the years that would not have been accepted in society. And because of the things that have happened and that people stood out and spoke about it, they were vocal, they were visual. They've now just become things that we look at and we do accept and we embrace and we look and go, oh, that's just whatever. I'd love if psoriasis could get to that stage where it's not something that people feel like they need to hide about. And I think that it's up to people like myself who feel confident and comfortable to show ourselves, to show those symptoms, to speak about it on public platforms, as you said. That's where people would start coming into the norm. It'll start just being something that people accept and people understand, because that's a big problem as well. People don't understand the condition. That's why they don't accept it. So I do think that, a time came at some point where I said, well, yeah, fair enough, I'm a broadcaster, but I'd like to really use my powers for good. I'd like to use the fact that I'm a broadcaster and that I do have a platform on radio and TV to highlight psoriasis and to bring about that change. So it's definitely something I'll continue to do. And as I said, I'm not the only one doing it. There's a lot of people in different countries doing it. And someday, hopefully, we'll have that wider acceptance. But thank you very much for having me on today and for giving me your time.
It has been an absolute pleasure. 12. That was episode 12 of the Survival Project. Say a massive thank you to Zoe for coming on and sharing her vast knowledge. I did tell you it was going to be very educational. If you'd like to see more of Zoe, you can check out her Instagram. It's Itchin To Tell You, and I'll pop the spelling in the episode description. And I also want to say a massive thank you to Salt's Healthier again for supporting today's episode. If you'd like more info on Honesty Connect and the work Salts do, you can also check it out in the description. See you next week for episode 13.